Well, let's go on to our next session, and we're going to be talking about, we're going to have a nice presentation, a case study. Now, this case study is with a company called Keyloop, and Keyloop is a company that provides, they provide tools, software tools, and customer experience tools to auto dealerships, and they are in 90 countries, 19,000 dealers. So it's a software application, and so we're going to visit with Jeremy Wilson and his journey about designing new compensation programs for their field organization on a global basis. And I like these types of presentations because you can kind of hear the thought process behind, okay, how are we going to rethink, and why should we rethink our sales compensation program? So Jeremy Wilson will be joining us, and Jamie Riley. And Jamie Riley is with the Alexander Group, and he participated in this experience with Jeremy. So are we ready to bring up our two guest presenters? Okay. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Jeremy. How you doing?
Hey, David.
Hi, David.
Nice to be here. So we're very excited to hear one company's experience. And remember, for all of you, as I've commented before, companies redesign their sales compensation programs. They make little changes, mostly throughout each year. But sometimes you got to ask the question, gee, is this thing doing what we want it to do? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, chaps. Thanks for joining us today. And also, if you guys can stick around for any Q&A that might pop up, okay? All right, great. Thanks. Go ahead.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the introduction. And as mentioned, I'm Jamie Riley with the Alexander Group. Jeremy Wilson and I, and we'll do introductions in just a moment, are here to talk a little bit about sales comp redesign. We'll start a little bit with David, as David mentioned, with some of the whys. What are the symptoms? How do we know things aren't working the way we'd like them to work? We'll then talk a little bit of process. How do we go about this? And then we'll get to the really interesting piece, hearing a little bit about Jeremy's journey and how that went, and asking some questions around the things that went swimmingly well and maybe some of the things we would do differently as we go back. So talk a little bit of process, and then we'll get into the case study. As mentioned, I'm a principal with the Alexander Group. I have responsibility for our London office and our European team here, working with our UK clients, of which we partnered with Jeremy. And I'll let him introduce himself at Keyloop as the Director of Global Sales Ops.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. I'm Jeremy Wilson. I'm the Director of Sales Operations for Keyloop. My team's responsible for furnishing our sales teams with the best tools and enablement and training that we can to make them successful, so we hit our sales and revenue number, and also, importantly, to deliver a really top-class sales experience for our customers. At the moment, we're really busy. We're integrating 2 new acquisitions at Keyloop. Inquiry Max, a UK company, and Rapid RTC from Canada. So we're busy focusing on how we integrate them into our organization and set ourselves up for success in the future. I've been with Keyloop a couple of years. Prior to that, my experience has mainly been in the telecoms industry, most recently before Keyloop, working with Vodafone Group Enterprise here in the UK.
Thanks. I appreciate the introduction, Jeremy. It was an interesting journey for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into some of the detail. I think if we start with the why, though, and I'll just bring up a few potential reasons that people come and speak with me or with David or with anybody about their compensation plan, and then maybe if there's one or two that jump out to you, Jeremy, you can call them out. How do we know we might have an issue? How do we know that the comp plan isn't performing the way we'd like? Well, we might have a mismatch between how the company has done and the way our salespeople were paid. Did we achieve great results and the payouts were low, or vice versa? Did we have an environment where people made a lot of money in sales compensation, but the company missed target? That usually means there's something misaligned. The second one here, and the reason wrong is in quotes, is this isn't about the people. It's about the behaviors. Do we have people that are acting in a way that isn't in alignment with our philosophy? David mentioned that a moment ago when he was talking with Alexandra. are they acting in a way that isn't in alignment with the way we want them to be acting or the way we want them to be selling, but they're still making a lot of money as the way the mechanics of the plan are working? As we all know, salespeople will figure out the pathways in the plan to go and make their money. When we make technical design choices, those have implications. And if we notice there's a mismatch between who we think should be earning a lot of money and who's actually earning a lot of money, we may need to take another look at the plan and understand why that's happening. Low growth, but despite investing in our sales compensation, now there may be other reasons than plan design, of course, but that could be a contributing factor. Are we doing the things we need to do to invest in the plan, but we're not seeing the kind of results that we'd like? High turnover, of course, if we have salespeople that are exiting the business, or we have trouble recruiting the types of sellers that we'd like. And then finally, this mismatch between the strategy we're trying to execute on. We're trying to grow in a particular area or country or vertical or what have you, but the behavior isn't aligning to that. Again, this is not a complete list. It's just a starting point, but these might be some symptoms. I don't know, Jeremy, can you speak a little bit about, is there anything on this list or anything else that I haven't talked about that were warning signs for you that maybe the compensation plan needed a look?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a couple of these stand out. The first one, in terms of, the flip side of this, we were not reaching our target, but we were paying out, a lot in commission. And the third one as well, the same point. So I think we were generally around about 80% of plan in terms of our results, but we were spending 100% of our commission budget. So, we didn't really have any clear visibility in the center as to why that was. Mm-hmm. It was, the plans before I joined Keyloop were managed very regionally. So within the countries, and often applying a local interpretation of some of the policies as well.
And it's interesting. I know you and I have spoken about that local execution flavor. Can you talk a little bit more about that lack of visibility? Because it's difficult to make good design decisions in a vacuum, right? So can you speak a little bit more about that lack of visibility and some of the ways that you thought about that as you moved forward?
Yeah, so I mean, the way our plan was set up was it was agreed centrally at the outset, but we had regional sales VPs, and they in turn then would have general managers running smaller regions for them underneath. And those guys and the sales directors and the finance partners in those markets very much had the decision on who got paid what, and the sort of interpretation of the policy. So in the center, it was very reactive. We would see numbers flowing through into our finance numbers month on month in terms of what we're paying out in commission, but we just didn't really have a handle on why. There was no tracking of manual adjustments that were being made. There was, to be honest, blindness really in terms of what was going on from the center.
And you could see how that would cause some drift when we can see the things that are happening from a revenue point of view on one hand, but then some drift in the compensation cost in the other. It's actually a very common challenge with multi-market organizations, as you have some by necessity execution at the edges. How do we maintain that balance of, we need to do some of the right things at the edges with the local teams, but still have the visibility to make good decisions and understand where we're investing things like compensation budget? So those are some of the reasons why. Let's talk a little bit about the how for a moment. You'll notice 3 basic stages here in how to go about assessing and redesigning a compensation plan. We want to start with the confirmation stage. This is really about, what are we trying to achieve? And there are a few buckets here that are important. The first is the business objectives and the sales strategy. So what are we looking to drive? Because this changes. This is one of the major reasons that compensation plan get out of alignment. It was perfectly in alignment 36 months ago when we made all of our technical design decisions, but the business strategy has changed. I mean, Jeremy, you're going through an enormous amount of change right now with acquisitions and thinking about the way you're trying to interact with your customers and all these kinds of things. These are exactly the sorts of things that change underneath your feet, and suddenly the comp plan is no longer fit for purpose. I think after we have an understanding of where we're trying to head, we want to think about, as was mentioned in the last session, this philosophy. What sort of an organization and a sales organization do we want to be? I think the important part about the confirmation stage here is that this may or may not be in your purview as the owner of sales compensation design. And I know, Jeremy, there are probably some elements on the bullet list here that are within your purview and some that are not. Can you speak a little bit about what you've got influence on this list of 4 versus some of the things that you sort of take as an input?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the business objectives tend to come as a bit of an input into my team in sales ops. The sales structure and strategy. So, the strategy comes very much within my wider team, I guess, with the CRO and the regional sales VPs. Job design, as you know, we spent a bit of time on this when we were doing the project. That's really owned by our HR function, but it was important for us to make sure with our go-to-market model that we had job designs that supported that, which we really didn't have at the time before we did the piece of work together. So so there's some of these very much within our gift, I guess, and some that some that sit outside of that.
And I think it's a really important point because you'll notice this sort of lightish blue bar at the bottom of the slider on continuous stakeholder engagement. That really starts from a best practice point of view in the confirmation phase, because frankly, most people that are designing compensation plans don't have the control over all of the elements in confirmation. So how do we do a good job of understanding what the business is trying to accomplish and then using that as an input into our process? And we'll circle back in just a moment to that continuous stakeholder engagement. After the confirmation piece, we need to move into the assessment and the design. There's a reason it's both assessment and design here. We need to understand what's working and what's not. And this can get pretty technical. Where is the spend going? Why, Jeremy, to use your example, why are we having these manual adjustments and what are they being made for? This isn't even really about calling somebody out. It's about understanding where we're making investment of our compensation budget. So getting a handle on where we're spending and why that is or is not effective is really important. It brings a set of facts to what is frankly a very emotional conversation. So that assessment piece is really important. And then we go into design, and I'll call something out in the center of the slide here. You'll notice the different component guidelines along the sort of the x-axis there in the table, and then the jobs are on the y-axis. That orange arrow that goes down through eligibility, as an example, is really important because we want to be thinking about these roles and these plans as a system rather than as an individual plan. The thing we're trying to avoid here is designing plans in a vacuum. So we don't work our way horizontally, where we design the account management plan, as an example, and then we design the specialist plan separately, because that causes drift between those two plans. What we rather do is go component by component so that we come up with a system of plans that works together. Last piece around execution, this is cost modeling. This is administration. Jeremy, do you own administration? Does it sit with the edges, down at the local level? And then evaluation, how is it working as we go forward? Again, I'll come back to this continuous stakeholder engagement, and maybe, Jeremy, this is something you can talk a bit about. How did you go about this, knowing that it by necessity has to run through this entire process? How did you think about this? What was the approach, and what were the results of that type of engagement?
So, I mean, stakeholder engagement was really important from the outset. We kicked this off, I think I was only 3 or 4 months into my time at Keyloop. So it was very important for me to get our senior leaders and sales VPs and sales directors on side early in the process. It's fair to say there's a new guy coming in. He's not been in the automotive industry. He's got these ideas that he wants to change stuff, and it was really important to get their buy-in. So the best way to do that for us, and it was very timely, was we had our global sales leader kickoff in Budapest a couple of months really before we got going on the project properly. And Jamie, you came along and spent some time with us, but that was really good just to set the scene around why we needed to change, to call out some home truths, I guess, around our performance as a business and why there was a need for change, and gave those guys really an opportunity to ask questions, to give their opinions, to challenge us. But we left those 2 days with them really much more on side. We did a pre-mortem exercise to say, okay, guys, look, we've now done this change. We're looking back, what went well, what didn't go well. How do we plan so that the things that don't go well, we avoid happening? And they were all really engaged with that. So it was a good way to get them engaged at the outset, which then in turn helped us down the line when it came to getting buy-in from their teams as we went through the project and then ultimately into launch.
And I'll pick up a little bit on that point you made about the why here. I think it's so tempting to come in and start talking about, particularly as somebody that's new in the role, start talking about how do we not have a growth-oriented metric in this plan, right? But that's the temptation. But that's because you and I and I suspect a lot of people that are listening in think about these things on an ongoing basis, right? This is sort of in our remit. It's really the why that we need to get people on board with, I think, as a starting point. And then the technical compensation conversation becomes sort of an outflow of that conversation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think it's the bigger picture. It was important for them to understand. Once we started doing some exercises with them around where their teams spend time and how much of their time wasn't high value with customers and sales generating, I think they could start to understand how we were underperforming and why. So yeah, it was that was very much the case. And
I think they start to look at sales compensation as a tool to motivate rather than this sort of this program that we're talking about technical design details on. Start to think of it a bit more holistically about, to your point, where do I want my team spending their time? What is the ideal sort of split of new customers and existing customers? So, all these kinds of questions, and then we sort of flow the design from that. Good. And again, I can't overemphasize enough this stakeholder engagement. So important. If we move forward here quickly to a sort of Gantt chart set of activities, you'll notice on the left-hand side that this is along those same three areas: the confirmation exercise, the assess and design exercise, and then the execution exercise. There's deliberately not a set of weeks on the top of this slide. I will say typically 12, maybe 16 weeks, depending on the amount of buy-in we need to do, depending on the complexity, the number of roles. Could be longer, could be shorter. I think I see these things get a little bit difficult when we don't leave enough time for them. So how do we make sure we've built in enough time for all of the process steps and the reviews and those kinds of things? And then being realistic and honest with ourselves about how long it's going to take us to do something like collect data from all the individual countries, if that's something we need to do. You can see I've got a dotted line there on current plan collection. That sounds really easy, and it sounds like something we should be able to do quickly. But if all of these plan documents live at the edges on a sales manager's desktop because they've been changed or they've been tweaked, it can take some time to pull those things together. So being realistic and honest with yourself about how long that's going to take really helps to build the strong foundation. You can see some of the other activities there in confirmation. The other one I'll call out is those stakeholder engagement interviews. So important to begin with questions, I think. What's working well? What's not? Is your team satisfied with sales leadership? Is your team satisfied with the way the system is working? Now, we don't have to respond to all of those observations, but getting those kinds of understanding serves the basis for the designs. Jeremy, can you talk a little bit about those interviews? I know you mentioned the meeting in Budapest, but can you talk a little bit about those interviews and sort of thinking about the individual country leads and sales managers and your thoughts on the best way to engage them?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, as I think as David mentioned at the outset, we've got customers in 90 countries around the world. We've got salespeople on the ground in 20 plus markets. So it was important to understand that there were regional differences between our regions and indeed within the regions and between markets. So, I think we spent quite a bit of time really trying to find some commonality across those 20 countries or so to break them down into maybe profiles to look at, what was our market opportunity, what's the maturity in the market, what was our market share, and then spend time with, representatives of each of those profiles, if you like, to really understand that in a bit more detail. And I think it was really valuable. Like we had 20 odd interviews with, ranging from members of our executive team to general managers, sales directors, people who worked in sales and people who didn't work in sales, but maybe were a receiver of the product of sales.
Mm-hmm. And again, getting those different perspectives, it's part of the, let's call it the charter of a sales compensation design team to go out and solicit those opinions and bring them in. Again, it's part of the art of this process is about making trade-offs, because the finance team is going to have things that they disagree with the sales team on, as an example. But how do we do a good job of recognizing those areas of disagreement and sort of shepherding the conversation to a place where we feel like we've found the right middle ground for the organization? The other just pieces I'll call out quickly here on the activities is plan analytics. I think this is something that, Jeremy, that you've actually started putting a system in place. You've got a lot more visibility into the data now than you did previously. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think in parallel with reviewing our plans themselves, we put in place a sales performance management platform as part of this. So, that was a massive change. All the commission calculations had been done in Excel previously. The comp letters were sitting in someone's drawer on in their briefcase from a sales manager point of view. So we had no centralized view of who'd signed their letter, where did it sit. I mean, unbelievable maybe. But, putting an SPM in place made a big difference. That gave the transparency to the to the end users around how their comp was calculated. It gave us central visibility, which was really important. I think it increased a bit of the trust as well. People were saying in the past, I sort of take it all as read that you guys are paying me the right comp because it's so complicated. I don't understand how you're calculating it. So that was a really key part, was putting that in place. That said, it was an extra overhead that definitely stretched us, I think, as part of this.
Well, and I think, I'll go back to the conversation from Alexandra a moment ago about transparency. That transparency and that trust is so important, because anytime a salesperson is spending time thinking about, did they get the calculation right? Do I need to do the math on my own and go back and say, Jeremy, you've missed this deal, or these kinds of things, is time we are sort of taking them out of what we really want them doing, which is being in front of customers and building great relationships and frankly selling things. And that transparency is so critical to that feeling of, I know it's going to work out appropriately because I can see how it's working. It's also an argument for creating simple plans from a data point of view. I know something else you and I have spoken about is this decision right at the edge to make exceptions or to include a deal or not include a deal. And we've spoken about the transparency in and of itself. The goal is not to take away that decision right, it's to understand it. Can you speak a little bit about that and sort of the center versus the edges from a decision rights and transparency point of view?
Yeah, I think, if we go back a couple of years, or, before we did this, those decisions were being made in, behind closed doors, and we'd no central visibility. I think once we put in place the new plan, the SPM platform, we have a commission review board that sits every month. So it's very clear about what the regional teams need to do if they want to step outside of the way that the platform is calculating the commission. They submit a request for an exception. We review it either, outside of the commission review board if it's not significantly material. And if it is, we'll bring it to that forum, we'll discuss it and approve it. And then it gets uploaded into the SPM as a manual adjustment. So we've got a proper audit trail of any of the changes that are made. And then we can look back, later and say, well, okay, what are the key buckets of activity that we were creating exceptions for, and why? And should we be including some of that in the plan? Do we need to change our policy? So it was really good in terms of shining a light on the plan and why we were having exceptions.
And it's a great point about the the evolution of the plan. If we find out that it's really all around big renewals, let's pick a topic that we need to make exceptions. Do we need to do something in the core of the plan design to cater more effectively for that? Because anytime we can pull those exceptions into the major plan, we've, I think, had an efficiency win, if you like. I'll call out one more topic here, and then we can tick forward. This iterative design team meeting is a really important concept. Comp design is a process that we need to guide people through, and then we will have a discussion and have a great meeting and make some great decisions, and then people will reflect and they'll come back and they'll say, well, I was thinking about X and Y and Z. That's not a bad thing. That shows that they're engaged in the process and that they are trying to get to the right endpoint, but we need to leave enough time to have those conversations. If we don't have them during the design process, they will come up in some of the later bars around final executive approval, because somebody will have called the CRO to say, we didn't talk about large deals, as an example. So really important to make sure that we spend the time and build the time into the process to have those conversations and to either flag them as something we couldn't resolve, or to make sure that we can resolve them. Good. So that's a little bit on the how. Now, I'd like to pivot then to Jeremy, to your story, to your experience and how this went. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the situation and what we were trying to accomplish as a starting point, then we can get into a little bit of how it went and what the results were.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So, just a very high level on Keyloop, as we've discussed, we've got sales guys in 20 plus countries around the world. We're providing software to the automotive industry. Our goal as an organization is to really create that technology that's going to make everything about buying and owning a car better, to really, create a superb customer experience, either for the consumers who are buying a car from a dealership or for the OEMs who are, obviously at the front end of the chain. Because of the spread that we've got in terms of markets, we tend to have some very small sales teams in some geographies. So, for example, in the Nordics, in Norway and Sweden, big geographic regions, we've only got 2 salespeople in each. South Africa, it's the same. Some of the East Asia markets, again, we've got very small sales teams covering very large patches. So by necessity, we have a lot of hybrid roles in the organization, even in our more mature markets where we've, 8, 10, 12 sales guys in UK, Italy, Spain, Germany, where we've got more salespeople. They still tend to have, hybrid roles, because we can't afford the luxury, or at least it was perceived that we couldn't afford the luxury of a hunter in some of these markets. So that meant that the sales roles were sort of ill-defined. And then the sales plan didn't really help with that either, the compensation plan. So the model for the previous 2, 3, maybe 4 years before I came in was based on just a sales measure, an AOV measure. So, we told the guys, here's your quota, go sell something. And it was really down to them to go and sell what they wanted. So we guys who are managing our existing accounts, our customer base, but also we were supposed to be going out and finding new customers and selling into the green space. But actually, they probably find it a lot easier to sell a few more things, a few more licenses or add-ons to an existing customer than to grow our base. And that's what would happen. They'd gravitate towards the easier sale. So, we've talked already about how those were administered locally as well. So that application of the policy was very much open to local interpretation, which meant that we didn't really have a handle in the center on how those plans were performing. And, we could see what was being sold. We could see whether it's being sold to new customers or existing customers, but it was always very retrospective, and the plan wasn't driving that behavior. It was more the sales guy choosing that behavior based on the market share that we had in a given market, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of what we had to do, we knew, because we were part of the time, we were an international subsidiary of CDK Global. So prior to Francisco Partners buying us this March and becoming Keyloop, so we could look at the performance of our US colleagues, and we knew that we were underperforming in terms of sales. So, our sales growth was much lower. Now, clearly there's other reasons for that other than the compensation plan, but, we historically had underperformed our quota. I think for 2-3 years in a row, as we'll see in the next slide, there was significant underperformance on sales. So we had to do something to to drive the team to take the opportunity that we believed was there for us in the market to go after. And as I said, the guys could really decide what to sell themselves. So there was no concept of targeting them on particular products, for example, or certain customer segments that we wanted them to go after. So we had to design something that gave us a bit more flexibility around that as well.
It was a little bit, if I recall, sort of a choose your own adventure plan, and wherever you landed is sort of where you landed. But we weren't using it as a tool to ask people to sell in a certain way or sell a certain offering.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the CEO at the time when I joined was like, well, there's a lot of low hanging fruit here, and I think that was part of it. It was like, let's get these guys thinking about selling specific products, for example, and that was done tactically in some markets through tactical campaigns. They might have run quarter to quarter, but not with any sort of central visibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we talked a little bit about already sort of the different markets and the different stages that they were at and sort of needing to bring them into the process. Good. So if that's the background, anything else to add on the background, or maybe we can talk a little bit about the project and the outcome?
Yeah, let's move on.
Great.
So in terms of the project and the way it went, so as we discussed earlier, we kicked that off with obviously as our pre-session in Budapest to get people on side, which was great. We then did the market interviews. So we could carve up our 20 countries into the sort of 3 profiles that we thought best fit. So around low, medium, high market share, low, medium, high market maturity, and the same for the opportunity for us as a business in those markets. And then we deep dived into one market for each profile, which allowed us then to look at, okay, if we were starting from scratch here, what would the optimum roles be in this market? What would our sales model look like, and how would we go about rewarding the sales guys in this particular market? So if we're in in the UK, for example, quite a mature market, we've got a really strong customer base. It's going to be a very different scenario than in an emerging market where we've got sub 5% market share, and we think we've got a lot to go after. So it was important to get that context and to gather the data so that we could then baseline where we were. From there it was really about going back to our executive team for a check-in to talk about the vision and the aspiration of where we wanted to go and why we were doing this, and the sort of direction we were thinking of traveling, to get their immediate feedback. Continuing with those cross-functional meetings that we were having and the one-to-ones. We had a strong core team as well. It's difficult in a multinational 20+ country organization to get a representative virtual team as a core working group. But I think we did pretty well in getting different voices around that table from different profiles, from the 3 profiles that we discussed. And then we came back and discussed as a group the sort of plan designs we were looking at, got some feedback on that, and then went back to our executive team to get approval for what we were proposing, and then finally launched and managed the communications around that. And I think those launch communications were really fundamental. So there was a lot of central communications out to the team, but also the GMs in the regions, the sales directors were all given packs to use with the team. We did a lot of one-on-one with certain sales guys. We attended sales meetings to really make sure the guys understood what was changing, how, if we were going to sell differently in some markets, what did that mean? More importantly, what was the pay plan looking like for them? Why had we done what we were doing? So yeah, it was very structured approach, and then a lot of communications at the end, as it was throughout.
And so 2 questions for you out of that. You mentioned check-ins with the executive team. Can you talk functionally about who was in the room and why you felt it was important to have those different stakeholders in the room as we went through this process?
Yeah, sure. So I think, the executive team, as was then, the structure's changed quite a bit in the last few months, but we had 2 regional sales VPs for EMEA and APAC. So they were in the room. We had our finance, our CFO, our CEO at the time as well, and our legal counsel and HR also. So I think legal and HR were obviously interested from an employee rights and works council type type scenario. The sales VPs very much obviously what does the change mean for sales and how are their teams going to receive this and what was it going to drive in terms of outcome, and the CFO very much about what's it going to cost me. So I think there was a good spread of stakeholders at those sessions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to have those voices at the table because, again, if we wait until the end to get in front of the CFO, that question about what it's going to cost me becomes a very different conversation. You mentioned the market GMs. Can you talk a little bit about the enablement you did with them around this change? And I know we spoke about that meeting in Budapest, but maybe some of the ongoing pieces to make sure that they were A, on board, but B, comfortable delivering this message. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's as a group that's really important that we keep those guys, well informed. They're a step removed really from the sales directors because they run both sales and operations and product marketing in their markets. So it was important that they knew where we were as we went through the process. And the way we did that was we'd have a monthly call with the GMs where we get them all on the Zoom call, and we'd take them through where we were, why we were doing it, what sort of feedback we were getting from their teams. So they were sort of pre-armed, if you like, with what had been going on in the working group or generally just in terms of what we were finding as we worked through this.
Well, and it's so important because they were going to be the port of call for anybody that wasn't happy with the outcome. I would think that's where the conversation would go.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of outcome, then I think if we look on the right-hand side of this slide, and apologies, it's quite certainly small on my screen, but if you can ignore the blue bell curve, that's just a standard deviation. But what we've seen over the previous 3 or 4 years is persistent underperformance in our sales performance. The sales guys hitting 50 to 70 to 80% of their quota each year, but nothing much changed. So, the plan never got changed. The performance didn't change. That wasn't a big surprise. You don't make any changes, you're going to get the same outcome. So when we started the project together, that was really the context, was how do we shift that bell curve to the right? How do we move that distribution over to the right so we're seeing more people hitting target? Our year end is the end of June, so we've got about 3 months left, 3 weeks left before the end of this year. And what we're seeing is now we've seen that significant shift over to the right. So it's been a good news story. Obviously, we've had some macro environment impacts on us as well. But yep. FY20 for us was 9 months of normal trading and then 3 months of sort of post-pandemic trading. And then this year has pretty much all been post-pandemic trading. So despite that, we've seen that we've got, I think it's 76% of our team are going to hit 85% or more of quota, which last year was about 31% hit that level of their quota attainment. So, the results speak for themselves. We're actually going to sell more this year. Okay, the targets are a bit lower because of the pandemic, but we're going to sell more in absolute terms than we did last year, which is a great achievement. Yep. There's still a lot more to do. These are first steps, but there's absolutely more to do.
Well, and those are great results. And as you say, there are a lot of things and a lot of the work that your team has done around enabling the team and supporting them on other vectors as well. But, I think the comp plays a really important role in that success. And maybe with that topic in mind, you mentioned some of the stats here already. So if you have anything else on results, but maybe for our listeners, the advice column here as well would be a good one for us to start to wrap up on.
Yeah, so I think, the only other one on results that we've talked about already is that clarity at the center. So, we got that through moving the administration of the scheme into my team and away from finance in the local market. So, that's really helped. I think it's also built a better level of trust with the finance teams in the market. And, they know now that if there's anything that the sales directors or the GMs want to push through as an ad hoc payment, then it comes back through and we get visibility, which is great.
Yep.
I think in terms of advice, the first one is really important, which is that focus piece. So what we saw was we didn't give the guys any focus previously. We said, go sell something, and they sold whatever they wanted to sell. Now, and again, I say we're still in the early stages of this, but, we're now targeting them on quarterly product accelerators. So we're we're getting them focused on the strategic products for that particular market. So every market would potentially have a different product that we're accelerating in a given quarter. And we're really seeing the guys thinking differently about what they sell in that month. We tried to introduce some, we brought in a pay curve that basically paid the guys who were at 50% or less, paid them less than par, but paid a lot more for overperformance. So we're paying 1.8 multiplier up to 150% attainment, and then continuing to pay with no cap beyond that of about 1.3. So, there's a lot more there for the sales guys to earn than in the past. And, for the hungrier sales guys in our organization, they're really making the most of that this year. We've got guys up at about 200% already this year.
Great.
So great to see that. I think the second point we've touched on a lot already, which is the communication piece. So, the sales guys don't really like change. The plan hadn't changed. I remember when I came in and met the EMEA sales VP for the first time, and we talked a bit about the plan. He's like, plan's fine, doesn't, we're not changing it. And it sat with him previously, so he's obviously quite invested in the way it was. But, we absolutely needed to communicate, as much as we could throughout the process. And then finally, that sort of external view. So, for 3 or 4 years, we hadn't changed anything. We could see what was happening in the US with our parent company and the sales performance over there, but we didn't really understand, what was our spend on sales and on broader, sales comp in our broader sales organization versus the market benchmark for a SaaS organization. Where are our teams spending their time versus, a high-performing SaaS organization? We didn't really have a handle on that. So, working with you guys and getting that external view was really invaluable.
Good. Well, then, if those were the advice and the things that you think worked well, let's maybe go to the ugly side of the ledger. What didn't work as well? What would you do differently, just from a sort of a lessons learned point of view?
Yeah, there's probably a couple. So I think the first one is, we wanted to reintroduce some other measures. So we didn't just have a sales only measure this year. We've got a revenue measure in there as well, or recurring revenue growth measure. And I think the sentiment is completely right. I mean, that is a core focus for us as a business, is growing our recurring revenue. But the execution was very much done on a market by market basis to say, we're going to target all the sales guys in this market on the recurring revenue growth in the market. Now, if you're working in a market where we've got 2 sales guys, then arguably, yes, you can influence that number quite a lot. If you're working in a market where we've got 12 sales guys, the feedback from the sales guys was, this is a bit demotivating. I don't feel I can influence this myself. It's not personal to me. And the irony is, in the last 3 quarters, we've been over 100% on recurring revenue growth, and we've paid out healthily against these measures to everybody. So, the guys who, it's a bit of a double whammy. The guys who didn't see the value in it and were demotivated by it, and we've ended up paying more than we would have done if we just paid them on their sales. So, but it's a good learning for us, and I think we'll take that into more specific book of business type revenue measures for key account managers next year. So there's a learning there. I think the second one maybe is around the product accelerator piece. What we found was we wanted to test this to see how it would work. It worked well in some markets where we had products that we could sell and implement very quickly. In other markets where there's a slightly longer sales cycle, we find that the guys just weren't selling the volume that we wanted to see. Perhaps we should have done that over 6 months instead of quarterly. So
Okay.
it was a bit of test and learn. I think we've learned a bit. We've now got the sales performance management platform to work with, so we can hopefully build things that are a little bit more agile into that for next year. So we can look at doing some sort of spiff type scheme, maybe for the product set if we have a subset of our products that we know are easy to sell quickly and implement quickly.
Great. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us and talking a little bit about your story and your journey at Keyloop. It sounds like you've got some good results, but as always, there's more work to do, as I think you rightly said. So I appreciate you spending some time with me today and chatting through the journey.
You're welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Thanks so much.
Well, very good, Jeremy and Jamie. Very, very insightful presentation. I got one question for each of you, and then we're going to go to a Q&A session with everybody. Okay, we'll bring up whoever. Hopefully, Alexandra's still with us too. So, Jeremy, question: this was a big project. Who was your who was your sponsor? I mean, did you just show up and, hey, I'm going to do this and go to war with the regional managers and who was your, how did you get the sponsorship internally to do this project?
Yeah, so good question, David. And yeah, absolutely right. I needed a good sponsor. So I think, to be honest, I think the CEO was a key sponsor for us, and then my boss at the time, who was our commercial VP. So commercial was a new function that we'd set up within what was then CDKI, and I think he was brought in because the CEO recognized the need for change, and it's probably easier to do that by bringing a new team to drive that.
Well, very good. So you had big talent behind you. Congratulations. And Jeremy, the process that you took your client through. So is this process, if I wanted to do this myself, can I follow those steps that you gave? Is that the right process? Or am I supposed to go out and get market benchmark practices or find out what the reps want? Or, I mean, is this process universal, or is it specific to the way you do things, or what?
Yeah, so I would say, David, this is the most effective way, in my experience, to go about this process. The inputs that you talked about are really important, market benchmarks and things like rep feedback. But this idea of confirming where we're heading, assessing how the plan is technically working today, and then driving this iterative design process is the way to go about this. Now, the answers that come out of the other end of this process will, of course, be different business to business and situation to situation. But from a process point of view, this is the way to get to some of the results like Jeremy was talking about from my perspective.
Excellent. So I'm a big fan of the process, as you know, too. And I believe everybody on the call, this is not some magical thing that Jamie is doing. This is just classic project management, getting data, finding out what the current practice is, engaging with the leadership, working through design sessions, costing it, and then rolling out the plan. And again, this is one of these things that Jeremy won't need to do that again next year, but he will be able to update using a similar process, but a very much lighter touch. Would you agree, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's right. The data you mentioned earlier, David, around some tweaks every year, to Jeremy's point about it being an ongoing journey with a major redesign like this, more on the 3 to 4 year kind of cycle.
Yeah, maybe even longer. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, listen, just stick around. So, and I'm going to ask Michael to bring everybody up, but let me just comment about the day today. And what the day was today was a couple of things. Let me summarize. And then, by the way, all four of us can answer questions for you. You can type them into the comments section, and we'll kind of kick around what the question is that you posed. And I already have one because there's been some chatter in the comments section about caps, so I'm going to come back to that. And then we'll see if we have a specific question for each of you. So let me just summarize what happened today. First of all, if you're involved in sales compensation, this is a good place for you to be, to listen to people, and gather content and develop yourself professionally. Sales compensation is one of those things that has a major impact on your company's success. And of course, it has a major impact on employee pay. And so, I mean, it's an endeavor worthy of your time, and it's an endeavor worthy of your professional investment. And I'm very thankful for the reward people and, of course, the sponsors to make this available for all of us, because I learn stuff every time I hear someone speak. So with that, I wanted to just, again, confirm that, you're doing the right thing to listen and gain additional information. So let me really quickly recap. And again, I encourage you to submit any questions you might have. We started off with Dave Cichelli saying change is inevitable. And he went on to say that, there are growth stages, and it changes the nature of the sales organization. Therefore, be prepared to be making, hopefully, small changes each year that can be brought up to date, keep the pay program aligned. So that's what David shared with us. And then we had David Fiss and Matt Blanchard from Verisent SEC, and you could hear what their issue was. For goodness sake, accurate reporting. At least being able to have visibility to what your sales results are, being able to communicate that to your salespeople. That's a fantastic competency to have. And of course, we want to have software that can support that. And of course, David is from the finance department, and he wanted to get those numbers right. I think Alexandra brought to us a bigger picture. She said, wait, there's a whole nother world about your employees. It's just not about a formula and getting the numbers right. There's a question about how they want to work in your company, how they want to relate to who you are. And compensation is really a facilitator of that. And in some cases, we have to ask the question, what are we trying to do with our employee workforce before we jump to the formula? So I thought that gave us a much better and broader thinking about the subject. And then we went to hear Jeremy and his journey. And it sounded, I will tell you, that sounded like a tough one. Multiple country managers, old pay plans, and then the very painful thing, high payouts and low performance. Oh my goodness, what an unfortunate scenario to find himself in. But it sounds like he pulled it off. And I think the key point that Jamie was making is we need a process to get people engaged, people involved, interviews with executives, and therefore then move into the activities of designing the plans and then rolling them out and communicating to them to the field. So, and by the way, join us tomorrow. We got some really great sessions. We have a session on digital transformation in the sales organization. I'm going to give you your building codes. You absolutely have to hear that. And then we'll have our friends at Open Symmetry talk about how to manage a SPM project. Okay. And we will have our prizes. Don't forget to go to the expos after our little session here. And then, and so you can register for the prizes. And those will be announced tomorrow. So, guys, I have a question for you. There was some chatter going on around capping incentive programs in our comments section. And so what's your view about that? So I'm going to start with Jeremy. So what do you think about putting caps in a sales compensation program?
To be honest, I'm not a big fan of caps, David. I think decelerate the multiplier by all means, but give the guys an incentive to go and sell. Otherwise, I sense we get a bit of sandbagging at the year end. So
yeah,
I'm not a big fan of caps.
Yeah, and Jamie, how about you?
I agree. I think the reason we often end up with caps is from a financial protection point of view.
Yep.
If we've done the math appropriately, things like costing, things like pay curve setting, the need for a cap is reduced, and we can then communicate to the team we have uncapped plans. So I think it's all about how we're trying to avoid that costing output in a different way than putting a cap on a plan.
Yeah. Alexandria, what's your views on the subject?
We're very rarely come across cap plans, and I think it is an issue. And I think I agree with Jamie. It's about the communicating that we have an uncapped plan. That's very powerful. If you do cap a plan, and if you do have a policy around big deals, I think communication is key, because it sounds to a salesperson, it just sounds like, oh, the company just made more money, presumably a bigger margin, and paid me nothing from that.
Yeah.
So explanation to why it's costly for your business to make those large payouts, and why those large payouts are not justified in this case, might be justified in another case, is key.
Great. So, some of the folks are saying, well, we have these mega deals, or sometimes unexpected things occur. And so the observation is maybe we could have a special policy for the mega deals. So a certain amount of it is credited to quota, and the remainder goes to a low payout schedule of some type. So we're not actually capping the total earnings, but maybe we're regressing the earnings on a mega deal that we didn't have. One company has the thing where you have to register the deals in Salesforce.com. And if it isn't in there, it isn't part of the typical quota planning process, then if it does come to fruition and it wasn't registered, then it gets a much lower payout. So I think, Jamie, your comment's right. It's some form of finances nervous. There's been some bad experience with big payouts. And as a result, we need a cap. But the answer is not capping the entire pay program. So let me see if I have another question here. What is your recommendation based on experience with complex plan design that includes different mechanisms for different products in the same cycle? So this is sort of just like, gosh, how do you handle product-based incentives? I'm gonna use that as the question. So Alexandra, you have thoughts about that?
Again, it's coming back to the transparency. It's how do you communicate that, but also how do you, and the problem with those is, of course, how do salespeople then can do like a mini simulation of what will happen if I sell that, if it becomes too complex. If they have access to tools like that obviously helps. But yeah, we come across that all the time.
Yeah. Jeremy, your thoughts?
I think if it's too complicated to communicate clearly and simply, then it's to be avoided. I think if we can communicate it properly, then it's fine. It's how do you distill it down so it's simple, even if the back end is complicated in the way it's calculated.
Hey, Jamie, we've seen these plans where there's a schedule based upon product type, and they can start to build up. You get so much for this product, you get so much for that product, and it just kind of gets fuzzy. What's your take on when a company's facing that?
It's not unusual, and that's usually a function of we're trying to make the plan keep pace with our shifting strategy. So now we're trying to sell product B instead of A, or C instead of B, and we haven't sort of cleaned those kinds of things out of the plan. So we end up with a very long sort of schedule, if you like.
Yeah.
This is where the art of the stakeholder management comes in, because we have to, as design experts, try to facilitate that conversation about trade-offs. What is really important, so that the plan that arrives on the desk of a seller is very simple. Now, that's not easy to do, but that's why those stakeholder engagement processes are so important, because we need to take that complexity away from the seller whenever we can.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to add my 2 cents here. So one of the things I've seen is certainly we want to reward for total sales or bookings or whatever the potential revenue, production measure is, but maybe carve out some of the incentive for product mix or number of quotas achieved by product category, and sort of isolate it rather than having that long list of separate commission rates and payout rates by product type. We actually create a parking space. Maybe it's called major emphasis line. And every quarter, the product divisions can kind of wrestle with each other about what do we want focus on in this quarter coming up. And that way we kind of put a perimeter around this product rather than have that long list of product commission rates and things like that, number of products achieved and stuff like that. I don't know. So, well, anyway, so that is really a great presentation that you guys gave, and thank you for joining us. Any other comments for our audience that you'd like to share, Alexandria? We don't hear you. Your mic's on.
Sorry. I think it's the overarching message that the to have a think about the sales commission in the wider picture, and to evaluate what tools you have internally. And there's lots of great tools out there. Become is one of them. There's lots of others that are here and not here. But it's whether or not you have the right tools to implement the right strategy, and what is the strategy going forward, post-pandemic, but also in the very long term.
Yeah. So, Jeremy, any advice for us going forward?
No, I don't think anything over and above what we've covered already. I think if anyone else is about to embark on a similar journey as to the one I had with Jamie and with our sales community, then very happy for people to reach out offline and get in touch. Okay. And Jamie, our professionals on the line, do you have any advice for them or counsel?
Yeah, I think it's 2 things. It's that stakeholder engagement that Jeremy and I talked about 3 or 4 times during that presentation. Yeah. Bring people into the process. So important. And then the second piece I would say is leave yourself enough time. It's so important to start these conversations early, and maybe even earlier than the business is ready to start them, so that you have the time to go on this journey. I can't emphasize that enough.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, panel. I greatly appreciate you sticking around and answering some of our questions. And at this point, we're getting ready to close out our session for the day. And I would encourage all of you to go to the expo. I personally am going to the Alexander Group booth. And if you would like to engage with me or have any conversations, I'll be there. And Alexandria, I presume you're going to your booth also. So please, if you guys have questions of any of the vendors that, Vericent or Open Symmetry, or, BCom or the Alexander Group, please visit us at our booth. And thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow, don't miss tomorrow. It will change your life. Okay, thank you. And we'll see you then. All right, tomorrow.